It's looking good in here. You can see through all the dust. First round of plaster and paint. Lots of sanding, of course. Quite useful having the dust because you can spot all the oil leaks. Bit more from the rear diff of the TR6. And a little bit from TR4A engine. Not too bad. Perfectly normal, that is. But in comparison, have a look at my Trolley Jack. That wasn't supposed to happen. I only used it to change the wheels the other day. And I did want to take that home so I could work on the TR6, my TR6, but that's not looking good at all. So I've got to probably go and buy a Trolley Jack. And still quite hot in here, of course. But look, relief is on its way. Hooray, air conditioning. I look forward to those going in. Cool the place down a bit. All right, it's getting there, isn't it? Another nice toy shop. Jacks. Lots of them. Look at all this stuff. Engine hoists, gearbox stands, massive axle stands. Look at those boys. Goodness. All right. Quite useful. Useful shop. Let's choose one. Right, so I got the Trolley Jack. Very nice it is too. It's almost as big as the car. I look forward to using that in anger on the other cars, but it means that I've got it here and I can at least start fixing my car. I did ask about the lights, which are still off, and of course I was quite rightly told, sir, your car is in the way, so we actually can't replace the bulbs. So, yeah, they make a good point. I'm missing a wheel and the car's on block, so yeah, I need to get this thing at least rolling. And I think I'm actually going to start with the inside with the steering column and go from there. Okay, steering column, which is held in by two brackets. There's one at the bulkhead end, which is sitting on a shelf angle that's welded to the body shell. I read that these can sometimes crack, but mine looks okay. And then at the other end, there's a sort of clamshell bracket that the bottom piece bolts to the metal fascia, this thing. And then you have the top part that bolts down onto it via a spring clip or wave washer that creates the clamping action. And there's a bit of felt in this bottom clip. Actually, I end up putting felt in the top as well. And then you bolt through all of that, both those brackets, but also at the same time you put in this guy, which is, I think they call it a torsion bracket of sorts, that stiffens everything up. So you bolt through both brackets and the brace, and that holds it all together. Mine's made a little bit easier because I haven't got the ignition key, which is normally dangling down here attached to the steering column. That's it. Let's get that lot put in. Right, good. That's in. Bit of a puzzle that is always, but it's nonetheless in. The hardware's not right. The bolts are a bit of a mixed bag of not quite the front two are correct, but the washers aren't. But the back two bolts are I don't think are the correct bolts. They need to be a little bit longer for my liking. So anyway, I will address that once we go over to the warehouse, but for now that's nice and solid. Okay, next job. Okay, so the next task is to reconnect the steering shaft, which is this guy, and and this telescoping rod that goes in the end of the steering column, and you make the connection back to the coupler. So get that back in and put the rocker cover back on, and I'll probably do the rocker cover first just because I don't want to leave it open anymore. But it's worth probably explaining why I had those two items out in the first place. Well, I was trying to get my car to imitate being a right-hand drive UK car. I was looking at the design of an oil catch tank, and it's going here on the UK car, so I just removed my steering shaft and I took the column out for good measure, although I probably didn't have to actually, just so I could mock up the tank. And I've got this is purely a mock-up of the tank shape itself, missing all the other bits and pieces inside it and the pipes, etc. But that fits in snugly next to the battery, and it's shaped on one side to match the shape of the body shell. So that's why the steering column was out. The rocker cover I took off because I was trying to find a place for a new takeoff for the rocker cover breather. The original rocker cover, and indeed the aftermarket one that I've got, the rocker cover breather pipe on this side centrally along the rocker cover, and we're going to move it to be probably between these two cylinders, because we're going to have an inlet for the rocker cover breather going into the side of the tank here. So it's a short leap to a new rocker cover breather on the rocker cover. So what I did to just check where to put that thing was, I talked I think last week about the 3D model of the rocker cover. Well, another reason to do that was to do some little 3D prints. This is a cross section of the rocker cover that allows me to just put it on top, and then I can then more easily see visually, but also measure it, how much room there is between the inside of the rocker cover and the side of the valve train, the rockers themselves and the push rods, because obviously it's different front to back. And I even went as far as putting a little sort of peekaboo window on the side of this thing that I could then check different locations along to find out where best to put it. And actually the conclusion was, well, rather simple in the end, as is often the case with these things, that the best place to put it is here, because you simply have the most amount of room between the two push rods. I did notice that these are actually a little bit, that one's okay, that one's quite loose, so I need to nip those up. I don't know why they're loose. So I'm going to reuse the gasket that's on there, and we'll get a fresh one in due course. Right, I need to reconnect the steering shaft, and that starts with this intermediate shaft, as Triumph call it, which goes into the end of the shaft that runs inside the steering column that goes inside the car. And actually this is Triumph's approach to a collapsible steering column, as it was back in the 60s and 70s. It was quite good that they were already thinking of it back then. And the idea is that should you be unlucky enough to have an accident and hit the steering wheel hard enough, you would cause the shaft to run down against this tapered collet that then drives through this rather thin-walled spacer, and by virtue of that you would get some telescoping relief on the steering shaft. So that was their safety system. Now once you do these bolts up, which is the sequence that's highlighted in the repair manual, only after having done that can you then set the final position of the shaft. There's a little bit of wiggle room in and out that will set where the steering wheel is, which is, you know, quite useful. But once you've set that, you then bolt down this flat section of the shaft with this little clamp, and it has this grub screw on it, which is again part of the telescoping arrangement, that you clamp it down, but so that it's obviously held in place day to day, but in the event of a collision it would actually slip through this bracket. And just to avoid making the same mistake that I did, if you do take off this end bracket from the splines, mark where it was originally, because I didn't, and when I put it back on, sure enough, I did all the bolts up and the steering wheel was off centre, so I had to take this back off and put it in the correct spline location. Of course, in the repair manual, all of that's highlighted, so I should have just read the repair manual as always. So I'll get all the bolts in, and then we'll have steering again. So once the car's properly back down on the ground, because at the moment it's still on wooden blocks on that front right, then I can nip up the bolts to final spec. Because at the moment if I put any torque on them, the shaft just spins obviously. And then there's some safety wire, some tyre wire to go through the ends of the bolts. I did make one error, and that is I've trapped the bonnet release catch on the wrong side of the shaft. I think this is supposed to go over the top. So I'm not about to undo all of that for the sake of the cable. I will undo the cable from the catch end and just re-feed it through. Other than that, all good I think. We've got steering again. Alright, so putting the dash and the gauges back in. Just a case of remembering where everything goes through this bird's nest. I had a bit of time when I first got the car actually playing with the wiring loom, because it had an intermittent cutting out fault. If I jingled any of the wires under the dash when I was driving, it would cut out, which was always a bit disconcerting. And sure enough, I found some shorted out lengths of wire that I removed. I think that were connected to the stereo at the time, and then the connector for the ignition, actually the plastic connector had gone brittle and was falling apart, so the bullets were sort of hanging out of it. So I managed to replace all that, and then for the sake of it really, to try to make it a bit tidier, I retaped the various sections of the wiring loom to try to be as logical as possible of where they connect into the gauges. It doesn't look very logical, probably still, you know, it's still quite messy, isn't it? But and obviously I'm not running the HVAC, don't really use that here in Dubai so much, so I just try to make it a bit tidier, although it doesn't really look it. But I sort of remember where everything goes. So headlight switch, windscreen wiper switch, which actually I'm not running. I did try to put in a new switch, this guy, and they didn't spring to life, the windscreen wipers. I imagine the motor is shorted out. The speed, these two go to the voltage stabilizer that lives on the back of the speedo. There's a couple of warning bulbs here, I think hazard and wipers, and a couple of bulbs also for the speedo, and a little earth that goes on the back of the speedo. And then we have the speedo cable, the tack cable. Those are always quite hard to get on the back of those two main gauges, because they're quite tight. And then a bunch of bulbs for the tack, and an earth cable for the tack, and then auxiliary gauges. If I get this right, I think it's these two are fuel. This one is the volts, oil, pressure, obvious that one, and then water temperature. So they're the main thing. They're the main things. I'm missing one or two of the bulb holders, which I've got tied up should I ever want to put them back in, and the dimmer switch as well, which I'm not using. There's also some various bulbs that I'm also not using. The glove compartment, and I think some courtesy footwell lights, which I could wire back up, but again, I'm not missing them for now. So yeah, it would be nice to replace all that really, and sort of upgrade it. I've seen some nice examples where people do that, and they replace all of that with well, either a new harness and or more modern connectors, so that you can change it to a bit more of a plug and play thing. I mean, whenever I put the dash in and out, it's always a bit of a struggle because of the length of the cable, and it's just all a little bit messy really. So if I get that lot in the right way, then in theory, although I haven't got the car rolling, it should I should be able to check if it starts. So yeah, good motivation to get all this stuff in. Okay, that's the dash in, and it's never an easy task actually. I've had the dash in and out quite a few times for various reasons, and yeah, it always tends to be a bit of a fight, particularly the main gauges. Trying to pack the wiring and the tack and speedo cables back into the dash is always a bit of a dance. The auxiliary gauges are a bit easier to do. But yeah, for now that's in, so that's looking a lot more normal once again. And well, proof is in the pudding as to whether I've connected it all up correctly. When I, in theory, connect the battery and turn the key, and I'm hoping it bursts into life. That's probably wishful thinking, but let's see what happens. And it's actually one of the reasons I want to redo the dash. I mean, you know, I'd like to remove some of the warning lights, maybe move the hazard to the middle here. I don't need the dimmer switch anymore, and just make it look a lot cleaner, I think. What's next on the list? The next item on the list is the front hub. This guy, which is the gateway really to getting the wheels back on and getting the car running. I've got to finish the repainting of the front hub, which I should probably do tonight, tomorrow, and then I can get the bearings back in and put the front hub back on. New disc and pads going on as well for the sake of it, and well, and obviously I'm not going to go to town on everything at the moment, but I will at least clean up this area, particularly where the front hub goes back on locally around the spindle. Porsche 911 firing up. Okay, I'll probably have to wait until the 911 is gone. Right, it's essentially rush hour in the parking. Okay, the spring and the damper were done recently. Telltale is the purple Super Pro bush. The Avo is an adjustable damper, although actually after it's installed there's no way you can get an Allen key on the adjustment, which is a bit of an irritation really. I wish somebody had thought of that, you know, at least put a plastic thing on it. The anti-roll bar and the bracket and the drop link I always thought looked suspiciously new. I don't think they're aftermarket. Maybe they are, but strangely the bush itself is quite perished, so that's worth changing. The bushes on the upper arm are, well, they're still there, but they're obviously crumbling, so that's worth changing. And the ones on the bottom would probably be worth doing at the same time, no doubt, although they look a little bit better. And then the other thing I spotted is the solid steering rack mounts. Just surely an aftermarket part, but no bad thing. I'm sure they help. But otherwise, it's okay down here, I think. Could do with being cleaned up significantly, but otherwise, it's in good shape. All right, so I need to finish off the painting of my front hub, which I have started. So I've done 2 coats of I'm using a Jotun product, Jotomastic 87. I think a lot of people will be familiar with that. Sort of effectively an industrial coating, which is an epoxy mastic, and lots of people are using it for car parts chassis, the underneath the cars. I think some people are even using it for body shells, thinning it right down and spraying it on. Seems to be quite growing in popularity. And for me, it's a nice choice because I can get it here quite readily. Jotun, obviously a big brand, so I can get it in Dubai. So 2 coats. I will top coat this with well, probably a black top coat, just because the grey is not. It's kind of a weird green grey actually. If it was a darker grey, I'd probably just stick with that. Apparently, you don't need to top coat this stuff. So I think in due course, I just need to get the right colour. Jotomastic 87. I think Jotomastic 90 is the one you need. That actually comes in lots of different colours. So I'll top coat it for now in black, and then that'll at least, and I'll do the same for other car parts, that you get the trick that when you chip this stuff, because you probably will chip it, when you chip the black off, you immediately see the colour underneath, and you get all the telltales of where to touch it up. Why am I not powder coating? That age-old debate. Well, I don't know the powder coaters in the region particularly, but I also just want to, control the quality myself, I suppose. This is probably a good example, really. There's so many bits that I don't want to have paint on, which is why almost for fun, really, but I highlighted on the 3D model where it is I'm putting paint. So anything, I'm not actually painting in red. Well, that would be quite fun. Anything in red is where I'm putting paint on, and anything in grey is going to be bare metal. So obviously the surface that the wheel bears against, I'm leaving that bare metal. Well, again, that's another debate, isn't it? What transfers the shear between the wheel and the hub? Is it the bolts? Is it the friction? It's probably a combination of the two, but I'd rather rely on the friction as well. So I don't want to have any paint or powder coat for that matter on the flange face. Same with where the brake disc goes. It's probably too heavy to try one-handed. Oh, okay, that's a bit of a workout. There we go. So actually it's such a tight fit. Well, it's actually a nice fit between the hub and the brake disc. I wouldn't want to have any paint or powder coat in that little gap, so I've left that off in terms of an area of paint, which is this little flange in here, this blue one, and then of course the top. It's funny, the hub design that Triumph came up with, because they actually do these little cutouts, which presumably are obviously to allow you to pull out the stud, so you get a bit of clearance of the stud. But funnily enough, there's so much wiggle room once you get the stud clear that they needn't really have put that cut out at all. If anything, I'd rather they had a bit more material to support the brake disc and give that a bit more friction as well. I'm in two minds whether I should attempt to machine a new hub, but maybe there's one or two things that could be added in. That for a kick-off, but also that, well, it goes back to the discussion of how the wheel is supported. But these are obviously lug-centric wheels, that the wheel doesn't bear onto the centre of the hub like modern wheels do that are hub-centric. And for sure, if I was going to have a new design machine, I'd probably make that the right diameter to suit one of the aftermarket wheels, a Mini Light or a Panasport, something like that. So you get the benefit of having a hub-centric arrangement to help with the shear transfer. But that's a sort of side topic. What else? Of course, I've painted the inside of this. I'm not painting, again, obvious. I'm not painting the bearing surfaces. So all of these stay unpainted, and they'll be liberally greased, so they'll be looked after from a corrosion perspective. But I did paint the inside of that. I globbed purposefully quite a lot of paint on the inside with a toothbrush. That seemed the best way to get it in there. That was quite badly corroded, and it's a very rough surface as well, so I've sort of blobbed on quite a lot of paint. And this stuff dries. It will eventually dry. It takes a good few days still. So that should be looked after on the inside. I think some people pack the entire cavity with grease, but that seems a bit over the top to me. I'm just going to, as long as it's painted and protected with paint, I'm okay with that. And then the grease, the bearings will be generously packed with grease before I put it back in. So that's it. What else? The little area around the studs. Yeah, obviously I wouldn't want any paint or powder coating between those two, so leaving that bare. And again, I'll probably just put some copper grease locally around the flange when I draw those back through. So before actually painting the hub, I did actually have a go at experimenting, really, is what can be described as. I used the old brake disc that is effectively scrap metal, just as a nicely corroded piece of steel to have a practice of the paint on. And also I kind of, it was interesting that it sands quite well, but I also had a bit of fun going to town at it with a screwdriver just to see how hard it really is after a few days. It's pretty good, actually. I mean, you can chip it off if you go hard enough. And of course powder coat would probably do better than that, but yeah, it's fairly impressed by it. And then I had a bit of fun just testing the film thickness, because it's quite a thick paint, really. But seeing what the finish is like when you brush it on, or whether you sort of stipple it on. And ultimately I think that and I've read that people are thinning it down and able to spray it. So I think once I get into the warehouse and into spraying a number of parts, you know, and set up a sort of mini spray booth of sorts in the corner of the shop, if I can get the ventilation right. So I've got to get these through, bearings, and obviously do the top coat, and then I can go back on the car. Yeah, all right, get on with that.